lucky turn of events. Every day that I do my job, I never take a day for granted in Springfield. And why I decided to run again, the question, there's a lot of work left to be done. And I think I take my job of representing people in my district very seriously. So I spend a lot of my days on the phone with my actual constituents, which they find refreshing, I think, because not many people expect to get to talk to me, and every single person that calls me conveys their concerns. And so what I hear from them are deep concern about our environment. We have climate change that we're dealing with. We know that on a global scale, with the increases in the climate, that we will likely in the next 20 years lose Miami Beach. We will lose areas of coastline that are incredibly important and incredibly important to people, even though we live in the center of the United States and we don't have as many natural disasters. We saw that derecho come through, and we have many family and friends across the US that we care about, and we care about the future generations. So climate change is a huge motivator for me. My district spans both Congressman Caston and Congressman Foster's district. There are a lot of science believing, worried folks out there who want a climate champion. I'm deeply concerned that my opponent's biggest environmental concern is 5G, quite frankly, when the future of our generations is the topic at hand. So the environment is a huge reason I'm running again. Number two, civil rights. We have the largest civil rights movement in the course of our US history happening right now. And that is something that I've been a part of the entire time that I have actually been in office. I've been filing bills on police reform, on ways that we can increase transparency, increase reporting, and do things that people in my district want to see done, because they are not okay with George Floyd. There was actually my intern for the summer organized in Downers Grove a Black Lives Matter march that had over 5,000 attendees to it. So this is a huge deal in my district. We want to be a part of the civil rights movement, making the positive momentum. And that's something I'm committed to continuing doing. And then finally, to continue to set us on the right path financially. I think I was really hopeful after in 2019, we voted on that budget that was setting us in the right direction. And then obviously we get a pandemic and the disaster that has been 2020. And I actually did not support that budget because I thought we weren't being financially realistic enough and that it wasn't balanced and that we could be doing more to be taking our loans and paying down more of our bill backlog. So we're getting rid of that bad debt that's 10% a month and freeing up more cash flow for things that we actually need, like the programs that are going to help save our businesses and save our families that are really struggling, because our district has been hit hard with people not necessarily just getting laid off, but maybe getting a third salary cut or having to take on new job responsibilities. That's a promotion without additional pay. And the moms in my district in this pandemic have been hit extremely hard with all of the stay-at-home schools. And so I've been trying to advocate as much as I can to make sure that as we move through this pandemic, we are ensuring the best possible future for the people of my district.
Thank you. Laura Hoyce has just joined us, and so I brought her in. Laura, we started by asking candidates to describe what motivated them to run and what they'd like to accomplish in the next term. And since you're running against Ansteva Murray, why don't we go to you for that next one? I see that you're muted, so why don't remove that.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you, yes.
All right. Well, I'm running to represent the taxpayers, the families and businesses in District 81 that are not currently having their interests represented. We have a tax and spend cycle that's continued in Illinois that's placing us further into debt. So we need to address that with reforms that have been needed for quite some time. As I walk and talk with people in the district, many of them are telling me that they're planning to leave Illinois as soon as their son or daughter is out of school, or they already have plans to move to a different state. And this is really a motivator for me to step up and say, look, this is a great state. We need to turn this around in Illinois. And in order to do that, we need to enact the necessary reforms that will stop the spending and taxing cycle and help us get back on track financially. There's a lot of work to be done in that area. And I think that the people that I talk to are really discouraged that we're not making progress to address those issues like the debt and the deficit and the unfunded liabilities that have been growing in the last several years.
Okay, thank you. Don Walter, how about if we go to you next?
Sure. Yeah, and thank you both, James and Warren, for being here and putting on this forum and listening to our concerns. It's greatly needed. A voice from our district is really greatly needed. As an election judge, I saw that nobody was running in the 83rd district. And as we know, the gerrymandering in Illinois with the districting and the legislature districts have rigged it so Republicans cannot win in this district. I think it was time that somebody did step up and run, because there's voices that aren't being heard in our district. We need real tax relief. That is the one thing that I heard most of going door to door. Property taxes are too high. I don't want to move out of Illinois, but I'm forced to. Or at least I have an exit strategy to do just that. And it was very sad to listen to those individuals talk about that. The other thing was that they we should be encouraging homegrown businesses here in Illinois. That also keeps businesses and jobs here in Illinois. And it keeps families in Illinois. When we have family-grown businesses, they have a tendency to stay as well. One of the other things was the protection of religious freedoms and the less fortunate, the unborn in our district. The abortion, extreme examples of abortion in the third trimester was appalling to people in my district, and they were asking and praying for somebody to step up and say, we've gone too far. We also have to support immigration policies that work for families and facilitate citizenship. We need a shorter cycle for immigrants to become citizens. Also, the vote to end the corruption in Illinois. We talked about the Illinois districts being gerrymandered as well. But we see the corruption in Illinois, especially on the Democratic side, that taints the bills that come through. We talk about bipartisanship when there really isn't anyone, because the balance of power is so much on the Democratic side that bipartisanship is just a keyword. It's a floating word. It's a buzzword. And so they were tired of that as well. We just needed another voice in our district, and it was just time to step up and take a challenge to the incumbent and see and listen to the voice of the people in our district, and gathering support, slow but sure. I think we'll see that to a good conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Hernandez.
Thank you so much for having us. This is a great opportunity to discuss what we're doing in the district and what we want to continue to fight for. In the district, in the 83rd district, I've been in office a little bit over a year now. There's so many needs that we have, and unfortunately that has increased due to COVID. There's a lot of families that lost their jobs, are losing homes, and overall the healthcare is not there. So that is where I think a lot of legislators notice that we have not done enough. There's still so many things that we need to fight for. But at the same time, there has been a lot of, especially for the freshmen, things that are not our fault. This has been an underlying issue for years, and this needs to get changed. So my priorities have been healthcare, property tax reduction, making sure that the families have a place to live in, but also something to eat. During this time, I've received more than 200 calls for IDES. IDES is not perfect. I know they're trying their best to work on it, but they're not there yet. And we need to continue pushing, and I need to continue pushing to make sure we are where we need to be. because the residents of the 83rd district and overall in the state of Illinois have been suffering because of this. So there are so many things that we still need to accomplish, so many things that I still want to connect to with the people and make sure we also pass an ethics reform. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Hernandez, I'd like to start with you for this next question. Since you had to go last time, let's go first this time. But you mentioned IDES and some of the issues that have occurred there, and that's related to the COVID-19 response that the state has had to undertake. And I'd like to ask you all, what is your assessment first of how well the governor has handled the outbreak in the initial stage, but then more importantly, what the legislature should do moving forward in the next stages and what you as a lawmaker would press for in the next stages. So Representative Hernandez.
Thank you for that question. You know, it's something that I think it was unexpected. COVID was unexpected to many of us. None of us expected to live 2020 in this way. We, instead of meeting in person, we're now meeting through Zoom. And it's pretty difficult because as we were trying to move forward after you saw the 2019 bills in the General Assembly, trying to fix the education system, the taxes, and try to get in a better place than where we were maybe a year ago. Unfortunately, that came down a little bit because of everything that has happened, the expenditures that we've had to spend that were not expected. But at the same time, the sickness, the illness is still there. COVID is still present. So many things can still happen from months from now that we are not aware of, but we need to be prepared. When it comes to the General Assembly and IDS, we need to make sure we learn from our mistakes now and be prepared for later on. I don't think, like I said, IDS has had years of underlying issues of not being funded properly, changing administration constantly, not having the enough staff members that can help with every case. There are so many things that are going on that we need to fix that. It needs to be addressed, and hopefully in the General Assembly and veto session or in the regular session, we're able to come up with a few proposals for bills that can propose more assistance for them, a better outcome for staff members and funding. I think that's the main course. Right now, for us, we have at least one liaison that helps us with all our cases, and that's 170 something of us in the Democratic side. And that's not enough.
Okay, thank you. Don Walter.
Yeah, it was an unexpected turn of events, the COVID-19, and our response was not that great. But it is an unknown. It was an unknown to all of us. It was something that was fully unexpected. Our governor's response was tepid at first and all of us too cautious. Took a little too long for us to realize that there's regions in Illinois that would respond differently. It seemed like there was almost a different COVID virus going through Illinois in each section. And actually it was the response and how we would respond to each of those regions. One of the really disappointing things I found in the governor was that in the senior citizen retirement homes, we were seeing half of the deaths, early deaths, coming from the retirement homes. And yet during a 3-month period, there were no inspections. There was no responses to the complaints from the nursing homes. 3.5 months went by before we went into the nursing homes to see what was going on, according to IDPH. That was a very, very, very slow response. And how we treat small business owners, the backbone of Illinois, and it was like we treated them differently than big box stores. And actually, I would think the small businesses could respond to those much quicker, those changes, than the big box stores. So we treated schools differently. We treated churches differently than small businesses. There was a varied message going through, coming from the government. So it keeps us unsteady on what's next, and we weren't knowing to expect. The government help should and continue, and I'm talking federal government help, should go to individuals and small businesses from the bottom up, not from the top down. And that's in the bill coming forward from the federal government should do that exactly, that way to prop up businesses as quickly as possible. Schools should be able to operate as they see normally fit. We get a little bit more of a school choice. Parents could be in charge, whether I want to send my kids to a school that's open or one that's closed, not these overall mandates to close or open. But it's good to get that message out early. And anything that comes from the federal government, we should take it. This has started before then, this underfunding of Illinois. If you look, we're at the bottom of money coming from the federal government. Our representatives in Washington, and this is an approximation, for every dollar that we send to Washington, Illinois is getting 70, 80 cents back. We need better representation in Washington and in Springfield. It goes for our district as well. We're not getting the dollars back from Springfield that our district puts in too. So to give our families the dollars that they need to make choices in their homes as well. We tax and tax and tax our families. So in other words, they have very less free spending money to make those choices. And then we tell them that they're living paycheck to paycheck and come to the government for handouts that go through our system, that everybody takes their 10 cents, their 20 cents, their 30 cents before it gets done. It's not efficient. So it's an ongoing problem in Illinois that's been there for a long time. And I think COVID-19 just exposed all of those problems even to a greater degree in Illinois.
Okay, thank you. Laura Hoist, let's go to you next.
All right, well, thank you for the question. I think that what happened with IDES does relate to an outdated system and inadequate preparation, which that is understandable. Nobody saw COVID-19 coming. But the way that the issues were not addressed in a timely manner that caused families who were seeking unemployment or other assistance were not getting return phone calls. And what I understand is that the state did make an effort to bring temporary staffing in, but that those individuals who were remotely working were not trained to handle the volume of calls. And I believe, as another representative said, that the funding is inadequate. So all told, I was disappointed in the slow nature of the services or the lack of services, and the response is still not good enough. There's a lot of work to be done to improve ES services and to protect the information of those who've applied. You know, we had that security breach that was just hundreds of thousands of people had their private information exposed, and that was an unintentional event, I'm sure, but it's not been corrected and not been addressed adequately. I think the governor initially had a good response to COVID-19 by communicating the guidelines and the protocols for safety, but then we've evolved into the nation's outlier and having the most restrictive day-to-day life under the 5-phase plan the state has laid out. And now we have problems related to higher drug use, opioid addiction, more use of alcohol. People have had extreme isolation, job loss, depression, mental health issues that are the fallout of all of this happening. And so I think the government's decisions that were made on 30 days executive orders that continued were made unilaterally and without the legislative input, where local communities and leaders could have had more of a voice in what was happening in their regions and in their communities, and get some more balanced approach where business owners and individuals would be trusted to follow the safety protocols and guidelines and be allowed to have fewer restrictions and more opportunity to make the income they desperately needed, because they weren't able to function as they had before. So I think we can do a better job even now. I mean, people are eager to get back to school. They're back to sports activities, back to those things that can be done following the safety guidelines. But to have only remote learning in the schools, I know is putting a lot of pressure on the families in this district. A lot of the parents that I've talked to say that it's just not working well for their son or daughter to be in school remotely and to not have the socialization and the other interactions that they need with their teachers and members of the staff at the school. So I'd like to see us loosen some of the regulation, but continue to keep our communities safe.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Sava Murray, you can go next. You're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. So your initial part of the question is about Governor Pritzker, and I'm going to add in a little bit of a response on what I think the Speaker Madigan's response to the pandemic has been as well. I think that Governor Pritzker has done a better job than the Speaker, quite frankly, at his response to the pandemic. The governor has definitely had pros and cons to his approach, and I've been a very vocal critic when I thought he hasn't been doing the greatest job. So one of the real difficulties was obviously the IDES that's been talked about. I was the main member of the Democratic caucus who ended up going and speaking to the press when these issues with IDES were happening. And I'm sure not many people know, but our Democratic leadership actually told us to not speak with the press. And I discarded that request because I thought it was more important to be honest and transparent with people and to live the principles of transparent government and give them as much information as I had available to me. My office fielded tons of calls on this issue. We had over 80 calls as of mid-June to July, which was the worst portion of it. And we were oftentimes the first person that anyone could get into contact with. And I always joke that the state representatives, I wish I was more popular, that everyone wanted to talk to me, but you know, we aren't the first person that people call, and it was horrible. And I think it was an abdication of our duties as a legislature that we were only allowed to meet for the few amount of days that we were allowed to meet, and that the only topics that we were allowed to cover in this past session were economic recovery and COVID-related bills, because I think there are a lot of issues that are being impacted in our life with COVID, but also major issues with we saw an uptick in unemployment. So as people try to get jobs, go back to work, making sure that our anti-discrimination laws are up to par. We have a lot of age discrimination, racial discrimination, gender discrimination that still happens in job application processes. I actually had a bill that was an anti-discrimination bill, which gave a little bit more teeth to the process of anti-discrimination. And unfortunately, that was something that didn't qualify to be heard, even though it's very, very relevant in this time that we're living through. I think in terms of what the speaker has done, there were more backroom deals than usual this year. As always, we got very little time to review the budget. I was in fact the only Democrat to vote against the budget this past year. The budget, not the BIMP. The BIMP, there were more Democrats who voted against it, but the budget itself. And I felt that it was done in a fashion because of COVID, where we had all of these amazing legislative working groups covering topics from education to economic recovery. And there were real ideas that were coming out of those groups, and those didn't seem to mesh with all of the bills that were actually then introduced. So I think that the backroom deal making has got to go. And I think that one of the biggest critical things is honestly making sure that we have a change in leadership for this next session. And so as a Democrat, I'm committed again to not voting for Speaker Madigan. I think that he hasn't been the right leadership that we need for this moment. And I think that that has a lot to do with our pandemic. So, and in this moment where there's also so many ethics challenges and such allegations that are so extreme with ComEd, this is not a time that we can be waiting for change, and we have to be proactive in change. So I have been committed as a representative working with my fellow Democrats, of which there are more every day, committed to not vote for the speaker in seeking new leadership and moving forward in that direction. And I think that that with that, the focus needs to be on economic recovery. We don't want to, after the last recession, I think Illinois was the worst, one of the absolute worst recovering states in all of the United States. So let's learn our lesson on that and follow actual best practices for how to get yourself out of a recession. And we need to be looking at additional grants to businesses to make sure that they don't close down. Dr. Fauci was talking recently that this could go through all of 2021. We need
Representative, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we'll get into some of those things a little bit later.
Okay,
Talk about
perfect.
COVID-19.
Well, I just think we should be thinking more long-term about the pandemic and what the impacts of that should be. And the legislature needs to be meeting regularly, just like the federal government is doing their jobs and meeting regularly.
Okay, well, thank you. And we'll talk about economy a little bit later. I have another question I'd like to ask about that. But you also have sort of stepped into the next line of questioning I was going to have. So we'll just start with you on that. And that is ethics reform in Illinois. You mentioned your position regarding the speaker. But could you go into a little bit more detail about what you think ethics reform should look like in Illinois? What are things that need to be changed? How would you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think in terms of ethics reform, number one, the leader of a state party should not be allowed to be the leader of another branch of government. So it should not be allowed that the Speaker of the Illinois House or the governor is the chair of the party. It should be a separate person, because otherwise the quid pro quo deal making takes over. And it's very clear that they don't have to delineate and say this is a quid pro quo deal in order for people who are donating to expect quid pro quo. And we've seen that in the state of Illinois, and we know that that's one of the hugest issues. And I always bring up the topic of gun violence when I talk about the problems with corruption, because I have heard that one of the reasons that we don't better fund anti-violence and anti-gun violence programs in the city of Chicago is because those gun violence prevention groups weren't donating enough, which to me is a horrifying thing to hear. And that is a huge area. I think we need more competitive elections. And so some people believe in term limits. I happen to think that elections are a better term limit. So I'm for term limits for legislative leadership, but giving voters the choice of when they want to term limit their own representatives. And so we need more competitive elections that can be achieved through fair maps and better ballot access. So ballot access is incredibly difficult in the state of Illinois comparatively to other states. We should be making it easier for independents and third-party candidates to get on board and be on the ticket. We should also be making lower the number of signatures required, because oftentimes that's used by both machines to keep people off the ballot. And if we lower the threshold of signatures, more people, more competition, better ideas rise to the top. And so I think those are just a couple of the ethics reforms that are desperately needed. I think there are more that we could get into in terms of transparency. Should people be allowed to unilaterally, as a chair, be able to block legislation moving forward? Probably not. There's a lot of things. Should the person who's in charge of investigating the speaker be the speaker, appointing his own special investigation committee? It was nice that the speaker stepped aside and let the second in command do that in this instance, but that seems like that should be something that's reformed, so we have a better process in place to make sure that we are doing proper investigations of ethics complaints as well.
Okay, thank you. Laura Hoyce, how about if we go to you with that question? What should ethics reform look like in Illinois? I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you. All right. As a starting place, last year, over a dozen ethics bills were presented to the House, and they were never heard. They were never addressed, and they were presented in a bipartisan manner. It is disappointing to know that what needs to be done has been formulated and presented, but Speaker Madigan, from what I understand, prevented those bills from being heard. So I think a starting place would be to adjust the House rules to require that if there is bipartisan support from a sufficient number of House representatives that there should be a hearing and a vote taken on matters of this importance. I believe Governor Pritzker mentioned in his State of the State that he's supportive of moving forward with ethics reform. I'd like to see us follow through on that. A big area that needs improvement is fair maps. Other representatives have mentioned that the gerrymandering process that has for decades now allowed one party to control or certain politicians to control the drawing of maps to their favor and have the voters who need representation desperately are not being heard because of the gerrymandering. Unfortunately, the deadline for fair maps passed during the COVID crisis when the General Assembly was not meeting, and we missed our opportunity to have a fair maps amendment, and that opportunity arises only once every 10 years. I think another area of ethics reform is to prevent current representatives from also acting as lobbyists. Term limits for legislators, I support that. More transparency is needed. The practice of presenting a bill or a budget and not having adequate time to review it, not even having time to read it, has to change. We need to have the representatives at a very least understand what's about to be presented to them in time to act on behalf of their constituents. And I don't see that happening in the House. So there is a lot of improvement that we can make on the ethics front. And I'm hoping that in the near future, with all of the corruption allegations swirling around Springfield, around the ComEd scandal and the bribery allegations, that can come to a head and we can bring about some positive change.
Thank you. Don Walter, how about if we go to you next?
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Term limits are a necessity, unfortunately, at this point, because there's two things that affect Illinois in a negative way. And one of them is accumulation of power. You know, Elizabeth Hernandez, or Barbara Hernandez, I'm sorry, you know, lets herself be on the county board and on the to represent our districts as well. And it has shown in her attendance in both of those positions. But also with Speaker Madigan, as he grew in power, it got harder and harder for him to be put out of office and to be taken out of that legislative action. And so, and also on the other side of the equation, Governor Pritzker with money. There should be campaign reform or limitation on campaign money going into these campaigns. So power and money has corrupted Illinois. And so it dictates that we have term limits. The other thing is with the fair maps that we had talked about as well. And then the lobby reform as well. Not being able to influence and legislation through lobbying for your 2, 3, 4, 5 years after holding office, relatives or staff members as well. So those would be my 3 major reforms going forward.
And Representative Hernandez.
Thank you. There's so many things that needs to be done. There's so many just unfairness that has gone through for several years. One of them is the lobbyist. I do believe that it shouldn't be a revolving door. As soon as you resign your position as a member in the General Assembly, that you should not be able to just become a lobbyist the next day. There should be some time between the time that you were able to become a state representative to the time you become a lobbyist. Maybe a year, maybe 2 years. I'm open for discussion on that, but I don't believe they should just automatically become a lobbyist the next day. Another thing is if any elected official violates and breaks the promise that they have committed to the constituents in a legal manner, they should be able to pay everything back that they have taken from the community, but also be able to not accept any pension. I think that's a really important thing of everything that is going on. When it comes to elected officials having other positions, I also believe that they shouldn't have any other elected officials positions. So I would be willing to remove that ability to have another elected official in another local government position. For me, when it comes to county board, I am not going to be running for another term. I do not want to stay in the county board and I only stayed in the county board because of the purpose of making sure I still represent the community that chose me. And I feel like I have done both pretty well. And they're both being attended to, but that doesn't mean that I'm okay with other elected officials doing the same thing. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wonder if I could also ask you about the speaker and leadership. Do you have, how do you feel about term limits for the leadership? And do you think that the speaker should be able to stay in office and in his role now?
I think with term limits, people are able to determine if I'm in the office or not. I feel like elections are term limits. Of course, there are some unfortunate situations that there are some elected officials that have lasted for more than 20 years, I would say. I at least know a few of them that have been there for 20 years. I'm not really sure how effective they would be in certain positions. Talking to a few of my colleagues, some of them have a really outdated mentality outcome. And I would love for fresh more ideas that can bring us forward in the state of Illinois. But it's not only the speaker. There's several of my other colleagues that have been there for more than 20 years. So I would want to see some change in that. But once again, it's their constituents. It's their district who keeps electing them.
But in the legislature, of course, the constituency is the party itself and the members on the floor. So if somebody's in a leadership position, such as the speaker, should there be term limits on that, or do you see that as the same?
I'm open to having those discussions. I feel like I want to know a little bit more what the whole proposal would be, how long it would be. Is it going to be 10 years? Is it going to be 5 years? How long is the whole discussion? But I do want to know more of just having those conversations with individuals of how long the speaker should be a speaker. But overall, I would want to see also a minority speaker one day.
Okay. And I'm sorry, one last question along this line. Are you comfortable that Speaker Madigan, who's been linked to the scandal with ComEd, that he can still have the confidence of the people of Illinois and of the legislature to be speaker?
I think the speaker is aware of the circumstances that are surrounding him. I think most of us are either supportive or willing to just see what will happen in the upcoming months. If there is any investigation that formally accuses the speaker, then that is something that many of us will have to make a decision on what we can do and what's the next step.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to turn next to the economy of the state. And Laura Hoyce, how about if we begin with you with this question? There's a graduated income tax on the budget in November. Do you support that? And if it does pass, many people have great concerns about the freedom that they see lawmakers would have to increase taxes. What do you think is the responsibility of the legislature to control that? If it doesn't pass, what types of things should the state do to make up the revenue that's discussed?
Well, I'm opposed to the graduated income tax, and I too share residents' concerns that it would open the door to other types of taxes, including taxes on retirement income. It was approved to be placed on the ballot at a time when, even during COVID, several legislators requested Governor Pritzker to take it off the ballot. It is just not the time in an economic downturn to impose another tax hike. I understand that it is being advertised and touted as a tax on the rich. Those higher income individuals making $250,000 and above includes business owners and job creators. This is a category of individuals in our district who have been leaving the state of Illinois for the last 6 years. I see it all the time when I walk to folks. There's changes of ownership in our district that have occurred because those higher income individuals have been discouraged by the corruption and the high taxes in Illinois and are leaving for other states around us that have rising property values, more friendly business environments, and in some cases, better quality of life. And so I caution residents to be very careful. This is a proposed amendment to the Illinois Constitution that would take away our constitutionally protected flat tax and would open the door to lawmakers not only having to tax middle income folks when wealthier individuals have left the state, if they choose to do so. The tax burden, I believe, will fall entirely on the middle class. And with Illinois being the nation's outlier in having the highest overall tax burden in the country, I don't think Illinois can afford to take that type of a hit. So in order to bring about solutions to the major financial issues we face, I believe we should not approve the graduated tax. We should not continue to kick the can down the road and say, oh, we've got another tax hike. Now we don't have to address the debt, the pensions, the unfunded liabilities. These are huge issues and they need to be brought to a head. So I'm urging people to vote no on the graduated income tax. It's not just my opinion that higher income folks would leave the state. It happened in other progressive tax states like Connecticut that have an income tax of 13% and climbing. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs and many have left the state because it is a high tax state. So I think there are better ways to resolve the issues. And you mentioned, how do we raise revenue? Well, that's a tricky one. There have been some laws passed recently, like the legalization of marijuana and the gambling that have been identified as ways to increase revenue into the state coffers. But I think also spending restraint is necessary in order to turn things around financially. So we just need to take a pause and not do any more tax hikes and look at all of what's in front of us and find better solutions.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Stava Murray, what's your view?
Yes, so when it comes to the graduated income tax, once that it passed out of the House and went onto the ballot, we were advised that as representatives and for our actual campaigns themselves, we are not to be urging people to vote in any particular kind of way. So I can speak to my personal view of how I will vote on it, but I cannot urge anyone else. And that's actually an ethics law in the state of Illinois. So anyone urging constituents to not vote for the amendment or to vote for it, quite frankly, is breaking ethics laws already as just a candidate and not as a representative. So I would urge someone to change their approach to that if that's something that they're doing. When it comes to the graduated income tax myself, I am going to be voting for it. It actually will be, my taxes will stay the same or go a little bit lower. And I know that for 95% of the people in my district, that's the same for them. And only 5% are in that $250,000 or above bracket. And that does include, unfortunately, my dad is a small business owner. And so he's one of those job creators. And I think he's going to be just fine. And there's no way he's moving out of the district or out of the state. A lot of those millionaires, billionaires have a lot of societal ties to our state. So even if they might be a little bit upset at us, my dad might be angry at me, maybe no champagne for me this Thanksgiving. They ultimately have so many ties. This is how they made their wealth. I know that being in Illinois and located here is what has made him so successful. And so I think that some of that threatening to leave is a little bit bullying of the rest of the 95% who will see a better return on their taxes. I think when it comes to how easy or difficult it is for us to raise or lower the tax bracket, the mechanism by which the legislature is voting on taxes doesn't change from this amendment. And that's a big misconception that's been vocalized by opponents to this, that it'll be easier. Now, yes, we can definitely change brackets and who is where, but I'm still representing my district. And so it's my job and everyone else's job who represents their district to make sure that we don't eat into the middle class too much, that we're not raising people's taxes. And my fear is if this fails, that the taxes are going to be increased from the flat tax. And that'll hit in the worst kind of way amidst this recession, because it's not, and I don't plan to vote for a flat tax increase, to be clear. And I wouldn't vote for retirement. I think my opponent mentioned retirement income. The graduated income tax doesn't attack retirement income as it is. So I think that's a conflating of two separate issues. I'm also not for taxing retirement income. I think that could increase the rate at which people leave our state in a realistic manner, and I'm not for that. I do think that we have to be very careful with our tax policies in the midst of a recession. And going back to what I said prior on being one of the worst recovering states, increasing taxes in a recession is not a smart move. And it hurts the ability for everyday people, and especially when you have a flat tax system, because you're taking money out of the pockets of people who will spend it, that keep the economy afloat. So I think that's a huge issue. And hopefully, I think that when we're thinking about, I think even if this graduated tax passes, we still have to be looking at those additional sources of revenue that my opponent said, because those are assumed already in the budget and we still aren't meeting where we need to be. So I think that it needs to be, we need to have more mathematicians and people who are financially savvy involved in this budgeting process, and that the backdoor budget process isn't working for us, and that needs to change, and there needs to be real input and not just collusion between the two parties for bipartisan budgets.
Okay, thank you. Representative Hernandez.
Thank you. This is an opportunity for a lot of our constituents, a lot of our families to vote on something that is able to make a difference to them. There's a lot of people, like my colleague has stated, there's companies that have had a lot of deals with government officials, with government operations, tax credits, and so on, tax breaks on their businesses. They haven't paid the fair amount that they should when it comes to taxes. And it's been hurting our families. And I see it here in my district. My district is one of, especially the east side of Aurora, is one of the low income areas in my district. And it's really upsetting to see, because a lot of the families do not even own homes, they rent homes. And that, of course, brings out the property tax values down for a lot of the people. And it's unfortunate to see, because I know they want to own a home, but they just can't have the ability to have a good paying job or have enough money to pay what they need to pay for their families. Especially now with COVID, things have changed. This would help individuals to be able to have a flat tax continue a flat tax for them, but make sure that the people that are able to afford it pay a little bit more in their taxes. But once again, this is the hands of everybody. This is something that I personally, if I didn't believe in it, I personally wouldn't vote on it, because my family has a history of being low income. My family was undocumented for 21 years. My dad is the one that continues working 2 jobs to maintain the family. And as a millennial, it's also hard for us to start a life here compared to back in 1970s. It's really hard to be able to have a home, to be able to own your own place and go to school, and you still have student loans. So it is hard right now for a lot of families, including sometimes my family that has that history. So I wouldn't want to make something worse for them. This is not something that I want to do for them. I want to make sure that the families are able to afford what they need to be successful and have a prosperous life in the state of Illinois.
Okay, and Don Walder, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really glad that the citizens do have a choice. I think it's about time they had a voice, whether they want a graduated income tax or a flat tax. They have a choice between a flat tax and making the lawmakers in Springfield dictate to them saying, what do you want, a flat tax, or do you want to cut expenses to balance the budget that way? Or do you want to keep increasing taxes and increasing taxes and increasing taxes? So this is could be very much a progressively worse tax referendum, in the sense that we're going to open up avenues of more taxation on corporations. And I'm so glad it gives our constituents a choice. If they vote no, they're going to say we need cut expenses. Find ways to cut expenses. That's what we do in our households all the time. We've had to do it in my household all the time through some unexpected illnesses, sending our kids to school. We found ways to cut expenses. You don't get the cable bill that you wanted. You don't get the cable that you wanted. You find ways to cut bills. So you can do that in the state as well. So I think that's the main thing, that the people have a choice. And so because we need a supermajority to get this on the referendum, to get the amendment passed. Next time, if it passes, we just have a simple majority to increase taxes. And it makes it much easier. And we've just had this supply line of taxation to citizens, and I personally am tired of it. I want to see Illinois cut expenses. We can do that. We can cut out the loopholes, the business loopholes, to increase the taxes on those corporations and businesses that get those loopholes and are evading taxes. We can give exemptions to the lower class, fill it up that way. But this piecemeal, different brackets of things to make it more palatable for these tax increases, again, the citizens will have a choice this time, and so I'm glad they're going to have a choice.
Thank you. Let's stay with you for our last question. Our time is running short, so I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to speak directly to voters and tell people why they should vote for you. And if you could just take about a minute or so to answer that.
Sure. It's been over 10 years since somebody's had the gumption to run in this district because the odds are stacked against them. But I think there's a pent up need and desire to have another voice in Springfield. We already have Governor Pritzker is a Democrat. We have Senator Linda Holmes that's a Democrat, and we don't have a Republican conservative voice in Washington or in Springfield and in Washington, to be honest with you. So I'm asking for their vote to be their representative, to have a balanced voice in Springfield, to have true bipartisanship because of the balance of power. And I will work 100% to give every effort to give them a voice in Springfield. So I'm asking for their vote.
Thank you. Representative Hernandez.
Well, once again, thank you so much for having this interview. This was great. I would like to tell the constituents that I want to continue working and fighting for them, and the issues matter the most to them. In the over a year, I've spent every single month, every single day talking to constituents, reaching out to them, talking to organizations and small businesses, getting to know their issues. And even now with COVID, I've been in constant contact with the small businesses, with nonprofits, with the community, trying to see what I can do to help them, how I can connect them with different resources, what bills might be coming through this pandemic that needs to be addressed. There's a few bills that are coming up that I do want to support, that I want to continue fighting for, and making sure that we bring the resources necessary in the district and the rural. So I really do appreciate everything, and please let me know if there's anything I can do to help you in any way. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Hoyce, how about if we turn to you?
Yes, thank you. I think people should vote for me because I'm their advocate, whether they're individuals or business owners that are struggling with what's been happening to Illinois pre-COVID and especially post-COVID, where business owners are concerned about costs of doing business. They're concerned about the regulations, the changes that are being proposed by those in power in Springfield. We do have a need for a more balanced House and more Republican representation in it so that we can make a more meaningful district, speaking on behalf of our constituents that have these concerns. I'm a business owner myself. I understand how much time and energy it takes to serve the public through the business and to meet costs and do what's required in the private sector. And it's becoming more and more difficult when we have legislation that has been passed just in this past year that increases potential liabilities on the part of employers, increases their costs. There are expanded government programs, unfunded mandates imposed on schools and municipalities, all of which drives the property tax higher and makes it more difficult to function in whatever role you play in our community. So, I think I do have a strong group of advocates that are hearing that I will help to give them a voice where they don't feel like these concerns are being represented or addressed in Springfield. The unfunded liabilities and the pensions and the budget gaps, a lot of that comes from new spending to expand government programs and to suggest other needs that aren't the priorities that from the folks that I'm hearing from, that just they want tax relief, they want spending restraint, they want to live more freely with their families, get back to school, work and play in our community. And that is why I'm stepping up to run for this election so that they can have a better, stronger voice in Springfield. And we can bring about some common sense solutions to all the issues that we're facing in Illinois. And yes, hopefully we can do that in a bipartisan manner when we're able to achieve more balance in Springfield. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Stava Murray, if you could conclude.
Yes, so I'd like to thank the voters, first of all, for giving me the honor of representing them this past 2 years. It's been the honor of my lifetime, and I have taken this role very seriously, and I would like to continue on listening to your concerns, listening to the things that matter most to you, for fighting for environmental justice, for a balanced perspective that takes into account science in terms of one of the greatest threats to ourselves and our children and the next generation. I would like to continue to fight for an economy that works for all of us, that doesn't just work for those at the top. I think that we need an economy that continues to work, that improves not only businesses, but also the people they employ. I think that we need to be working very hard on ethics reform. And so I'm committed again to not vote for the speaker, as I know that is very important to everyone in my district. And I'm going to be a voice on the side of the Democratic side, who is inside a caucus making a decision about the next leadership, strongly advocating for better leadership that can take us where we want to go as a state, because we know we have so many great strengths and assets as people who live in Illinois, and we don't want to let the corruption allow us from flourishing as it has. So I think that the environment, ethics, and the economy are 3 reasons that you can vote for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes today's interview. I want to thank the candidates for their time and their participation. Good luck on your campaigns. The election is November 3rd, but early voting begins as early as next week for mail-in votes. So as voters, please remember that that's one of the most sacred obligations you can have in a democracy. And I hope that you will get out and vote. We hope that you will use many resources in making your decision, including the Daily Herald and dailyherald.com. Meanwhile, thank you all for your time and good luck.
Thank you.